Welcome everyone to the 2013 Seed Savers Exchange webinar series. Tonight's topic is starting a seed collection. We'll be talking essentially how to start maintaining the varieties that you love on your own. And we chose this topic largely as a result of your requests. It seemed that during each one of our previous webinars someone would ask, where do I start, or what do I need to consider if I really want to give the seed saving thing a try? So to answer these questions, I went to our members. For those of you unfamiliar with Seed Savers Exchange beyond our seed catalog, we not only maintain the nation's largest non-governmental seed bank of its kind, but we also facilitate one of the nation's largest seed exchanges. So each year, hundreds of gardeners and farmers around the country send us a list of seeds that they've grown. We then take those lists and publish them in what we call our yearbook. And our yearbook contains over 12,000 varieties of fruits and vegetables and is sent to all about 13,000 of our members who may request and buy seeds directly from other farmers and gardeners. And we refer to the members who offer seeds in the yearbook as our listed members. So any of our members can become listed members by offering pure open-pollinated public domain seed. And some folks like myself only offer a handful of varieties and maintain pretty small collections. However, some of our listed members have been saving seeds for dozens of years and have seed collections that consist of maybe several hundred varieties. So I went to some of these experienced listed members to ask, how did you get started? How did you grow? What resources did you use along the way? And what advice would you give to folks just starting a seed collection? And they responded, and I've combined their stories and advice into the following slides. Largely, this webinar is meant to hopefully provide some inspiration and introduce some ideas that you may not have considered related to starting your own seed collection. At several points, I'll simply be referring you to other webinars that can provide more sort of how-to procedural information related to things like seed storage or isolation or hand pollination, etc. Now, I've tried to simplify most of this presentation. A little bit of seed saving knowledge is probably helpful to begin with. If this is your first webinar, looking back in our archives at seed saving for beginners or planning your garden for seed saving will probably serve you well. As always, we'll start this presentation by reminding everyone of our mission, which is to save North America's diverse but endangered garden heritage for future generations by building a network of people committed to collecting, conserving, and sharing heirloom and open-pollinated plants while teaching the value of genetic and cultural diversity. Certainly, by encouraging you to start your own seed collections and by providing you with resources to do so, we hope that this network of gardeners who preserve our garden heritage backyards, our community gardens, or farms around the country will grow. Before you begin, I think it's helpful to ask why. Why am I starting the seed collection in the first place? And taking some time to consider this question will have a significant influence on what your seed collection will consist of, as well as probably how you use it. Some of the popular reasons for starting a seed collection are listed here: preservation, adaptation, thriftiness, experience, and these certainly aren't the only reasons to start a seed collection, but these are the reasons that we heard over and over again from our listed members. And preservation in particular seemed to be the number one reason for our listed members to start a seed collection. For many, it was simply the preservation of one particular variety that they loved to grow, and one year they looked in seed catalogs and discovered that variety was no longer available commercially. So they planted some seeds that they had left over from previous year. They found friends or neighbors willing to share some of their old seeds. They grew them, and they started to set aside a few plants each year strictly for seed production so that they wouldn't have to lose the varieties that were important to them if seed companies dropped those varieties from their offerings. And this is a fairly common reason for our listed members to start their seed collections. This diagram helps to explain why. The loss of commercial diversity over the past 100 years is absolutely staggering. At the top of this graph, we can see the number of varieties of a particular plant type that were offered by commercial seed houses in 1903. And then 80 years later, the bottom of the diagram shows how many of these varieties remain. So we can see, for example, 544 varieties of cabbage were offered commercially in 1903, and in 1983, only 24 of them still exist. And that's not to say even that they are still available commercially. Most of them probably are not. The lower half of the diagram simply shows which varieties are being maintained by the National Seed Storage Laboratory, which is the governmental repository of our agricultural heritage. And it's likely that the bulk of the varieties that disappeared since 1903 have been lost forever. And while organizations like Seed Savers Exchange or the National Seed Storage Laboratory exist to protect this loss of diversity through seed vaults and long-term storage, really the best way to encourage the survival of rare varieties is through a network of gardeners and farmers growing and eating and sharing these important varieties. Adaptation can be another reason for maintaining a seed collection. Each year as you're harvesting seeds, you're selecting plants that grow well in your garden. So if you're a gardener in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, for example, and you're growing tomatoes, you're only going to be able to save seeds from the plants that had time to mature within your growing season. And over time you might find that earliness is a trait that more and more of your plants exhibit, and the varieties you maintain will slowly become better suited to your particular garden space. The couple on the screen here, Sarah Klieger and Andrew Still, are of the Seed Ambassadors Project, and they're listed members that began collecting seeds essentially in order to maintain regionally adapted varieties in the Pacific Northwest. Thriftiness can be another reason for maintaining your own seed collection, particularly for folks who may order several $100s worth of seed each year to fill their gardens. And although you may not need to buy seeds from a seed company, it is important to keep in mind that as you're saving seeds, you'll be investing additional time and energy as you harvest and process them. Finally, many of our listed members save seeds simply for the experience, and some began saving seeds as a way to more deeply invest themselves in the gardening process, more intimately acquaint themselves with their plants, and others began saving seed simply to share it with others and for the experience of introducing gardeners to rare varieties with unique characteristics that maybe they've never seen before. And this is certainly why I began saving seeds. And in some ways, saving your own seeds elevates your status as a gardener, and many of our listed members love serving as a resource, not simply for new varieties, but also for knowledge. And this brings up something I noticed when corresponding with our listed members. Why evolves. And though many started out with just a simple goal in mind, the experience of saving seed influenced their reason to do so. One of our listed members, Tatiana Kushnareva, started collecting tomato varieties after moving to Canada from Russia because she was not satisfied with what the grocery store offered. And what began as just a way to find more flavorful varieties turned into a really incredible preservation effort. And her collection now includes about 2,900 tomatoes and 500 varieties of other edible crops. And even more impressive is the resource that she's developed to preserve and share the histories of these varieties as well, and that's through her website, Tatiana's Tomato Base. On the other hand, you may set out to save all of the seeds you need from year to year, only to find out that you're not able to grow some of your plants to seed maturity, or you're not equipped to overwinter biennials. But starting a seed collection is not all or nothing, and reasons for seed saving are very unique to each individual, and reasons will change as your knowledge or as your time or space or interest fluctuate. If you have an answer to the question why, it's time to think about what your seed collection might look like. Some logistics to consider are the scope and scale of your project. Scope refers to which varieties and plant types you'll include in your collection, and scale refers to the size of your collection. The scope and scale are interrelated and they're probably influenced by your reason for starting a seed collection in the first place. If your reason for saving seeds is simply to become more acquainted with the plants in your garden, maybe you only need to choose a variety or two within each plant family to get a basic understanding of how they reproduce. If you're only interested in adapting a kale variety to your particular garden, you may only save seeds from that one plant type, but you're probably going to be growing a lot of kale plants each year. So as you begin to think about what you want to include, here's a couple questions to guide the scope of your collection. especially as you're choosing which varieties and which plant types to start with. So what would you hate to lose? This is essentially the question that started our organization. Our co-founder Diana Whaley couldn't imagine a garden without her grandfather's morning glories, the seeds of which had been passed down through her family for several generations, and it was only natural that she start saving these seeds first. Another consideration, what do you love to eat? And this is another excellent place to start. For myself, I love green tomatoes, and when I tasted these tomatoes, pictured on the screen, they're called Dwarf Barrel Beauty. I knew that I had to save the seeds and I had to share them with others. And thankfully, they also grow well in my garden, which is another important consideration. I'd hate to try and start out saving fava beans, for example, because I haven't had much luck with them. And when you're starting out, think of what you've grown successfully and consider starting there. And that relates to the question, what is your gardening experience? And it's also worthwhile to consider your seed saving experience, which may be significantly different. So I've always grown Swiss chard beets, for example, but I've only grown them for eating. And growing them for seed here in Iowa requires overwintering them in a root cellar, planting them out in the spring, and then growing them through a second season to produce seed. Though I'm comfortable growing them in their first year, I haven't done much root cellaring, and I might hold off on saving seed from these for now until I get a little bit more experience. And if you are intimidated by biennials, or if you're not sure how to isolate your varieties from cross-pollination, maybe you're interested in starting out with something simple like tomatoes or peas. And if you're brand new to seed saving, we have a great webinar, Seed Saving for Beginners, and that's archived and available for you to watch as sort of an introduction. But remember that knowledge isn't static, and if you're interested in growing something for seed that you're not experienced with, find someone to help you out, or use some of the resources I'll mention at the end of this presentation to learn what you need to know and give it a shot. Next, here's a few questions to think about as you consider the scale of your collection, not just the number of varieties, but also the amount of work that will be required. And many of these questions will go back to influence the scope of your collection as well. So how much space do you have for your garden? This will determine in part the number of varieties that you're able to grow out each year, but also which varieties you can realistically maintain. If you have a container garden, it'll be difficult to grow enough radish plants for a healthy population, for example. And even if you have plenty of room with some crop types like radish and kale, you have to designate some plants as seed producers. You'll not be able to eat them, and so you're devoting a large portion of your garden to seed only. So just a consideration. Also, how much time do you want to commit? As I mentioned before, it's probably best to start out with just a few varieties in your first seed saving endeavor. This will give you a good idea of how much additional time you'll be spending each year, say squeezing tomatoes or threshing bean pods. Where will you store the seeds or the roots or the tubers? Seeds don't really take up that much room, but if you're going to be overwintering alliums, you need a place to cure them and a place to store them in the meantime. If you're in an apartment, you might need to get creative or maybe look for other folks willing to lend you some space in their basement or root cellar. Storage will also influence how often you will grow out each variety. For most plant types, storing them for a few years in a cool, dry cabinet in your home isn't a problem. Maybe you'd like to include 2 varieties of watermelon in your collection. You can grow them out in alternating years so that you don't need to worry about preventing cross-pollination. But if you'd like to maintain, say, a dozen varieties, and you can only afford the time to grow out one variety each year, you'll need to consider better storage conditions for those varieties that you're not growing out for several consecutive years. And this sort of brings us back to what I mentioned before and what our listed members certainly advise. Start small, because inevitably the scope and scale will grow. But by starting out with just a few varieties, you gain an understanding of the process as well as an understanding of your investment in it. Your skills will improve greatly in the first year or two, and over time a dozen watermelon varieties may not seem so daunting. And Chris Heschel, a listed member from Wisconsin, started out just to save seeds of a pole bean that had disappeared commercially. And for, I think, nearly 20 years, this was one of just 3 legumes that he maintained. But then in 1999, he learned about Seed Savers Exchange, and soon after, he inherited close to 70 soybean varieties, I think. And this year, he's offering nearly 200 varieties in the yearbook. Even if you're starting out small, it's worthwhile to consider how you'll manage and organize your collection, both the seeds and the information. And here are a few considerations. So what are your storage needs? If you're going to be growing out your entire collection each year, your storage needs are probably very minimal. Just keep them well labeled, cool, dry, and dark. Larger collections may require more sophisticated storage if you have limited garden space and you can't grow your collection out as frequently. If you're going to be saving roots and tubers as well as seeds, you'll need to have a place for root cellaring as well as a way to separate and label individual varieties. And we do have an excellent webinar available in our archives related to seed storage that covers where to store your seeds, how to prep them for storage, how to label them. Because you can only fit so much information on the envelope or the jar that you use to store your seeds in, and because the information on those seed packets is not easily accessible, searchable, or sortable, you should consider keeping a spreadsheet like this one, and this will allow you to see more information at once and better maintain your collection. And when you're starting small, like I am, with just these 2 varieties, it may not seem so important to maintain a spreadsheet, but it is better to think ahead for future growth. And at minimum, you should keep track of the following information for each variety: the variety name and species, your original source and their contact information so that you can go back and get new seeds if necessary, years that the variety was grown and the dates harvested, seed requests as well, and contact information for those folks you send seeds to in case you need new seeds. Maybe the variety became crossed up and the original source no longer maintains that variety. Variety description, and this can be extremely detailed. You can include in histories, garden notes, or it can just be sort of a reference to refresh your memory and maybe help you describe the variety to others. It can also be helpful to include a log of where you grew that particular variety in your garden. Many of our listed members use maps to keep track. And speaking of advice from our listed members, when taking the time to research and organize your data, back it up. If I simply had my spreadsheet saved on the desktop of my computer and it was accidentally deleted, it might be very difficult to recreate the information I had stored there. So cloud-based storage is a great solution, using something like Google Drive, like I do, for example. But several of our listed members with large seed collections keep paper files as well. I guess finally I'd like to say a word about saving and sharing seeds with others, so networking. And there are several reasons to connect with other seed savers, as I've got listed here. Probably the most important reason to connect with others is to share resources. And these resources could be things like seed storage facilities or processing equipment, but more often the resources shared are knowledge and experience. And the Yearbook is a great place to find other seed savers close to you or seed savers with similar interests. Our forum is another great place for information. And as mentioned early in the presentation, our listed members love serving as a resource to other gardeners just starting to save their own seeds. And some of our members even form sort of mentorships through regular correspondence with others. Networking is also a wonderful way to acquire new or maybe very old varieties for your seed collection. The Seed Savers Exchange Yearbook offers, as I mentioned, about 12,000 unique varieties. It's a great source for varieties to be sure, but it's also a great source for information about the varieties that you may already have in your collection. Networking is also a way to back up your seed collection. For some of our larger listed members, portions of their collection were inherited from older gardeners wanting to pass on the seeds they had collected over several decades. Building or connecting with a cadre of other seed savers in your area can lead to community seed projects as well. And in April, we'll talk more about organizing seed swaps or seed libraries as part of a separate webinar that we have. But the longer you save seeds, the more you'll want to share those seeds with others. And a final thought from our listed members, exchanges are sources of inspiration and enthusiasm. And as one of our listed members, Sylvia DeVos, told me, put the word out that you're interested in seed saving. Get your friends involved, start a local seed saving group. Surround yourself with other excited seed savers and grow your projects together. And though experienced seed savers are some of the best sources of information, here are a few other sources of knowledge and inspiration. Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth, one of the most comprehensive seed saving books out there. Saving Seeds by Mark Rogers was another suggestion from our listed members. A resource that I often refer folks to is a seed saving guide for gardeners and farmers. This is put together by the Organic Seed Alliance, and it's a free download from their website, seedalliance.org. Another free downloadable resource is the Community Seed Toolkit from Seed Matters, and this has some great sort of very simple sheets that describe things like isolation distance or population size, describes how plants pollinate, but it also has information about starting seed swaps and seed libraries. The Seed Savers Exchange annual yearbook I've mentioned several times in the presentation. This is just a wonderful resource for many reasons. The Seed Savers Exchange forum as well is a place where you can go and log on, ask questions to other experienced seed savers out there. And then the Seed Savers Exchange webinar series, which you're participating in. And we've got several of these old webinars archived. We do one each month. Stay tuned for more this coming year. So to summarize tonight's presentation, if you're just starting a seed collection, save what you love and save what you couldn't live without. Start small. Start with just a few varieties of simple self-seeding annuals. Don't be intimidated by seed saving. As our listed member Jim Jepkema so rightly suggested, saving seeds of many plants is not too difficult, even though there are some very detailed resources, including a few of our own, that can sort of make the process seem overwhelming. But start with just a few varieties this year and see how it goes. And finally, surround yourself with other seedy characters, so seed-saving folks who can inspire you and who will share their knowledge and resources. And I want to, as we close, say thank you so much to these seedy characters. These are the listed members who helped me put this presentation together. And thank you all so much for attending. I hope that tonight's topic was informative, and I look forward to many of you participating in future webinars.